everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I am filming my April wrap up. It was a pretty decent reading month. There wasn't a lot of books I read, but I did read some pretty strong ones, and some of the books, I think, if I remember, were quite lengthy. So I did read a total of 7 books, which isn't, again, a lot, but I did like quite a few of them, so I'm happy overall with what I read. So let's start with the first book I read this month, and that was The Darkest Corners by Kara Thomas. I absolutely adore this author. Something about the way she writes mystery thrillers just works for me. Mind you, I've only ever read anything like YA from her. I think she's only published YA, but it is so good for me. In this book, we follow a young girl who is coming back to her hometown to visit her father, who is dying in prison, and he will die in prison, so she's coming to say her last goodbyes, but she has to come back to her hometown in order to do that. She now lives in Florida, and for reasons that you will find out in the book, she has kind of a history in this town. It's kind of insinuated from the summary of the book that her and her ex-friend went through something pretty insane together, some pretty dark stuff, and they kind of kept that to themselves and they haven't really talked about it, and they're no longer close, obviously, so it's a lot of secrets unfolding in this small town. I imagine that some of the stuff that appears here in this book could be very triggering. A lot of abuse, familial abuse, sex work comes up a lot. Sex work with minors, sexual assault, death obviously also comes up here. I really like how these stories progress, but I think that a big critique that you could probably give these books is that it doesn't really feel satisfying when the stories end. They're pretty hard-hitting, and even though the loose ends do get tied up, it still feels very bleak at the end of the day. There's not really a happy ending, even though all your questions get answered, and everything pretty much gets answered towards the end. It's not a slowly secrets unfold, if I remember correctly. So if you do everything kind of crashing together all at once, those big impact climaxes, then you'll like this. But if you don't like that, then you might not like this. I just love her YA mystery thrillers. I've read all of them except for her latest one, which I'll probably pick up at some point too. So I'd give this 4 out of 5 stars, and I loved it. So the next book I finished was The Heiress and the Orc by Finley Fenn. This is the second book in this author's orc fantasy romance series. I absolutely love the first one because the dynamic between the main characters in that one was so rich, and I could definitely feel the angst from our heroine, who knows that she shouldn't be with an orc, but she really wants to, and she really cares for him. In this book, I wasn't really feeling the romance between them, and the characters themselves as individuals didn't stand as strong for me as they did in the first book. We follow a different couple in this one. In this book, we follow a young woman whose father has recently passed, and the only way to get access to any kind of inheritance, that she has to marry someone. She has to marry a lord. She obviously can't do that if she falls for an orc, and orcs aren't technically lords. I do think that this author writes some of the best more intimate moments between partners, so I enjoyed those aspects, but the romance itself was kind of lackluster for me, so I gave it a 2.5 stars. So the next book that I finished was The Montrumologist by Yancy. So this is kind of a fantasy paranormal horror book. I originally thought this was middle grade, but it's definitely more YA, and it's very gory, a lot of body horror, a lot of insect bug body horror, so keep that in mind. Death also comes up, death of a parent. In this book, we follow a young boy named Will Henry, and Will Henry is an apprentice to a montrumologist, which is essentially a person who studies monsters in an anthropological type of way, as opposed to fantasy type stuff. This honestly leans more towards sci-fi horror than fantasy horror, because there's not really anything fantastical about this. Everything can pretty much be explained through science and biology. So the plot for this one is that there is this giant herd or giant group of monsters called, I hope I pronounce it correctly, anthropophagus. These are these giant super tall monster things that eat corpses for the most part. They have giant mouths where their tummy should be, and they have giant really long claws, and they're pretty violent creatures. And Will Henry and the man he's apprenticing under take it upon themselves to stop this, essentially a group of monsters that could kill a whole city. So I really did enjoy the story for the most part. I thought it was really entertaining and really fun. I did have some issues, and I've seen other people point this out. The way that the author frames other civilizations, other communities, is kind of not good. These characters are very much of the era. Like, this does take place in 1888, so there are some like kind of red flag comments from certain characters. Okay, hi everyone. So while I was editing this video, I noticed that my thoughts were cut off here, so I wanted to add in something before I continue because I didn't get my full thoughts across. While some of the characters did have these like red flag comments about other cultures and other groups of people, I also felt that some of the themes that the author themselves put into the book added to these kinds of comments. Like, it's one thing if it's just a character being shitty. The author themselves were also adding things that made me feel uncomfortable. As someone who, well, I don't have like an extensive anthropological background. I did study anthropology in college. Some of these comments would not fly today, if that makes sense, about other people's cultures. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Sorry for this whole editing issue. Thanks. Also, when the story itself is not really progressing, the author does have like this tendency to kind of go on tangents where the character is like, our main character Will Henry is talking about his relationship to the doctor, his like family, like existential crisis type stuff, and that's all well and good, but it was just so overwritten at times that like I just have pages of like the main character Will Henry, who's like only 12 or 13, just like going on and on and on, and I'm like, you are the most boring 13-year-old ever. But I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I finished one of my most anticipated of this year, and that was Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is an adult fantasy novel. It is a sequel to Black Sun, which was super popular. I read an arc, and I absolutely adored it. I gave it like 4.5 out of 5 stars. This author could write anything with these characters, and I'd probably give it like glowing reviews just because I really like the world and I like the characters that we are given. This book definitely was like that typical like middle book, but I still really enjoyed it. The pacing is slow. Like, first and foremost, this story is slow, and if you're the type of reader who's like, nothing happened, I'm super bored, 2 out of 5 stars, then this book probably isn't for you, unless you really, really do like the characters like I do. I don't mind a slow story. I can't really go too much into the plot of this without like giving away like major stuff, but this takes place in a fantasy world that's inspired by like pre-Columbian like Mesoamerican cultures, so it's not very like Western, like knights and kings and queens and all that kind of stuff. It is multi-POV, so there's probably a character that you'll find yourself really attached to. My favorite character is Narampa, who is a sun priest. I know she wasn't everyone's favorite character, or she wasn't as exciting as the others, but I absolutely adored her in the first book. I mean, they're all really well written in my opinion. A lot of political intrigue, a lot of like epicness to the story overall. I've already mentioned the like sun priest character, but we also follow a young woman who is part of like a race called the Teak, and they're essentially like mermaid sirens. We also follow a character who's like a chosen one character, except this chosen one is not meant to like bring about good stuff, more so like bad stuff. One of my favorite aspects of this book is that characters are starting to interact with other characters that they hadn't before. So for example, in the first book, the siren type character only really interacted with mostly the chosen one character, and then the sun priest character also only interacted with certain other people within like that religious order. And in this book, people are aligning themselves with other people or finding new enemies, what have you, and it almost feels like bringing like 2 mutual friends together and seeing how they react to each other, if they like each other or not, because I love all these characters and I want them to all like each other, but because they might be like on different sides, they probably can't. I obviously enjoyed this and I loved it, so yeah. So after that, I listened to the audiobook for the Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar. I hope I pronounced that correctly. If not, I'm so sorry. This is a YA contemporary sapphic story. I don't typically pick up like YA contemporaries, especially like the lighthearted ones, unless like the author's like BIPOC or queer. I find myself enjoying those more so than books that are not that. But in this book, we follow a young character named Mishat, and for her like business class that she takes at school, she has to start her own business and like turn a profit, that kind of thing. So she decides that she can do henna. Her family's from Bangladesh, so she's very familiar with like applying henna on people, and she's fairly good at it as well. Throughout the story, we see that a lot of women in her family also have done henna, so it's something that's very much part of her culture and something that she's very passionate about. Unfortunately for her, her crush and classmate also wants to do henna, except she doesn't really seem to be like part of a culture that does appreciate the art of henna. I think her crush is Irish and Brazilian, and to my knowledge, henna's not like a huge thing in either culture. And this character quite literally saw the henna one weekend, thought it was pretty, and decided to apply that to her business project. So she's quite literally like profiting off of it, and our main character obviously feels a certain type of way about that. Our main character is also a lesbian, and a huge part of the book is seeing how other characters, her family and her friends, react to her coming out to them. You see a little bit of homophobia, lesbophobia, racism, microaggressions throughout the book, but overall I did really enjoy this. I thought it was a really cute story. The part of the story that really resonated with me the most is when our main character finds out that her crush is also going to do henna for this business project, and she is absolutely like crushed about it. I'm not from Bangladesh, or neither is my family, but I am Mexican American, and I would never tell anyone what they can or can't do with their body. Like, you do you, but I do sometimes side-eye people taking part of my culture, and they're obviously like not doing it well. It's a side-eye thing, like y'all kind of look like fools, but like, you do you. I will never like come up to you and like start a fight or anything. But when Nishat finds out that her crush is doing henna and making money off of it, like my chest clenched like really hard. I was like, oh god, this is terrible. Another aspect of the book that I think some people might consider a spoiler, but I feel like it could potentially be a trigger, is that someone does get outed in this book without their consent. And because I'm kind of like a petty like person, the person who outed someone, I don't think that they got truly what they deserve for doing something so cruel. The book kind of plays it off in like a very like they go low, we go high type of way, but I'm not that type of person. Like if I can't fight you, I will probably ruin your life if you do something like that terrible to me. The next book that I finished was also an audiobook called Tokyo Ever After by Emiko. This is also a YA contemporary romance. This book is described as The Princess Diaries meets Crazy Rich Asians, which I've seen both of those films and I adore both of them, so that's pretty much why I picked it up. In this book we follow a young girl named Izumi, and she finds out that her birth father is the Crown Prince of Japan. Her father invites her to Japan. The book was very much just like okay and like fun and lighthearted. I don't think I have like a huge connection to like the story overall. It was fine for what it was. A huge aspect of the book talks about like public scrutiny. Everything that our main character does in Japan is like under a microscope by the press. It's very much giving like Meghan Markle when she was in England and she was getting like tarnished by like the paparazzi over there. A lot of like xenophobia as well. There was also a really cute like romance that I enjoyed for the most part. It was between Izumi and her security guard. I think she's 18 and he's like 20, so it's not like a huge gap or anything, but I thought it was really adorable, and it did make me kind of interested in like picking up other books with that type of relationship. So let me know if you know any, like security guard, royal guard, like someone who's supposed to protect someone else like as a job. Again, I thought it was fine. A lot of like self-discovery, like who am I type of narrative, so I don't think you're like missing out by not picking this up, but I think you will at least have fun with it. And the last book that I finished in the month of April was The City of Dusk by Tara Sim. This was also an arc that I received. I really wanted to enjoy this, but it did have some pretty big issues that really kept me from giving it more than 4 stars. I'd probably give it like a 3. If I was being generous, a 3.5, but a 3 is fine. This is supposed to be an adult fantasy, but it reads like YA. In this book we follow multiple characters who are the descendants of gods of various realms. They live in a specific realm called Vitae, I think, and like 500 years prior to the beginning of this book, the gods of these realms, again the parent gods of these characters, closed like all the portals or pathways to get to different realms, and at least the realm that this book takes place in is now dying. Like the crops are dying. Dead people can't like cross into like the undead realm or whatever have you, so they take it upon themselves to try to open these pathways, and it's gonna take some sacrifices along the way. This is a multi-perspective book, so you'll probably find a character that you resonate with, hopefully. There's one character that I think the author is like more drawn towards too. Like she writes from this one character a lot, and unfortunately for me, this is the character that I like the least. She was giving very much like I'm a tough YA main character who's like a bad bitch but like makes all the wrong decisions, and she's so loud and infuriating. Like, that's the character that I think our author likes the most, and that's the perspective that we got a lot, unfortunately. I wanted to see much more from literally any other character. This is adult, and there are some like moments where I thought the author kind of pushed it to a more adult audience. Again, specifically with this one main character that our author seems to write from, it felt very YA, like the writing was just very young, which wouldn't be a bad thing if this was a YA book, but it's not. It also took me really long to get through, and I thought maybe that was like an issue with me, but it's like this book is like deceptively long. Like, I saw like a physical copy, I only read an e-arc, but the physical copy is maybe around 400 to 500 pages, which isn't like too long, but the font size was like really, really small from what I saw of the physical copy. Like, it's one of those like secretly really long books, but it could have also been cut down a lot. I felt like the author focused on building, like world building, certain things that I didn't think needed world building. So if she had shaved off like 50 to 100 odd pages, this would be much better. The pacing would have been better. But I will say though that the ending was pretty epic. I think that was like the best like written part of this whole thing. Like, it was like reveal after reveal. I enjoyed that because we finally were getting somewhere. The choices that she made in this like climax scene towards the end, I really enjoyed, and it actually kind of made me eager to pick up the like next book. Hopefully she will iron out these issues that I had, because it seems to be like every review I've read has mentioned the writing voice as well as the pacing. So hopefully if that gets like squared away, I think this could be a very good series. So those are all the books I read during the month of April. So please let me know if you've read any of these, if you are interested in reading any of these, if you dislike any of these. I'd like to hear anything you have to say in the comments down below. I will also link my social medias as well as some far more important links down below. Feel free to like, dislike, comment, or subscribe, or do neither. It's all cool with me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.